everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi. Did you enjoy the film?
Yes.
Well, we have two very important people here tonight to discuss it with you, and I will bring them out without further ado. First, director James Vanderbilt. And actor Dennis Quaid.
We stopped the concession stand, by the way.
Yes, they're allowed a little sustenance. I'm Stacey Wilson Hunt. I'm the Hollywood editor at New York Magazine. Very pleased to be here to discuss this very intriguing film, which I enjoyed very much because it's about journalism. And most people don't care about journalism, what happens on the inside, but this is a movie that sheds light on just a little bit of what we deal with. This is obviously at a very heightened level. Before we get to that, I'd actually like to ask each of you what you consider your first big break in Hollywood. Maybe I'll start with Dennis.
My first big break would be Breaking Away, actually. Because I was very good movie, really good movie. Peter Yates directed it, Dennis Christopher and Danny Stern and Jagger.
People still love it and talk about it all the time.
Yeah, and before that, I was going along from job to job, doing drive-in movies and things like that back in the day. And I got Breaking Away, and life changed for me. I started getting offers. So
That's good. That's what you hope for.
it was good, yeah. It felt good.
And James, you obviously were a very busy screenwriter for a long time before this film. What movie offered you, or what project offered your first big break?
I mean, for me, just selling my first script really was the idea that somebody would pay me to make stuff up was pretty mind-blowing.
You did make stuff up for this movie, though.
No, but now they pay me not to make stuff up,
Right.
which is ironic.
Right.
Just that anybody would pay me to do anything, and then I did a couple of films, which was really, really great, and then I did a movie called Zodiac, and that was a sort of a
Good movie.
thank you.
Yes. Wanted to give a
That was
picture
a
on
big,
that.
that was a big moment for me.
I would say so. And so how does a first-time director land Cate Blanchett, Robert Redford, and Dennis Quaid in his movie? I'm sure that's not a typical scenario.
No, I mean, by the way, I'm still trying to figure that out, to be perfectly honest. For me, it was just I thought this was a fascinating story, and I always sort of knew that, I knew I wanted to direct it, and I knew that the only way that we would ever get it made would be with movie stars.
And you had read Mary's book, and that's what attracted you to it.
Yeah, no, I had seen, I didn't see the original report that aired on 60 Minutes 2 on Wednesday, but on Thursday I heard about it because everybody heard about it, sort of everywhere immediately. And I experienced it, I think like everybody did, just sort of watching the news and sort of going through it. But I didn't start thinking about it as a film until I read Mary's book. And what I was struck by was how much I didn't know about something I thought I knew a lot about. And I've always loved sort of process films and movies that kind of take you behind the scenes, and I just thought that I started thinking about this as possibly a movie. Very long story short, we ended up optioning it and writing the script, and Mary was kind enough to let me do that. But it was really about getting the right actors for it and trying to make it something. I knew that the only way to get it made would be to get enough great actors interested in it so that people with money would go, well, we have to make a movie with these people in it.
Right.
So, maybe despite its subject matter.
Right. And obviously Kate was very involved in the process once she signed on, and then was Robert sort of a second piece to that?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that I'd worked with him on something as a writer and that he was going to direct, so I knew him a little bit. But I also knew that there was no, and I wrote this with him in mind. I didn't tell him. I wasn't like, hey, Bob, I'm writing a movie for you. Because I think he would have, thrown me out of his house if I said that. But I wrote it with him in mind, but I knew that, his first question would be, who's going to play Mary? So I knew we had to get, the right Mary for it. And, we got the script together, and they ended up sending it to Kate the day after she won the Academy Award for Blue Jasmine, which I was like, oh, we're screwed. Like, there's
She's like exhausted, by the way, from being up all night.
Well, yeah, I mean, and also, I just don't think you win your second Academy Award and then you go, what I really should do now is work with a first-time director. Like, that's a great career plan. But you know, luckily she responded to it and liked it. We got on the phone and talked for about a half an hour about sort of approach, and then she signed on, which kind of, you know, made my jaw drop very, very quickly. And then I wrote, you know, Robert Redford a letter after that, and I sent him the script, and I said, you know, here are all the reasons I think, you know, this would be, you know, you would be wonderful in it, and here's why I think it could be a great movie. And I talked about All the President's Men and how much that had meant to me, and the idea of him playing a journalist again, you know, and how that would resonate. And I said, please, a lot. And I also said, oh, by the way, your scene partner is going to be Kate Blanchett. So, and he called me up and he said yes, and which was amazing. And he called me too, which was great, which doesn't happen. You know, it's usually the agent calls the agent, but like I was at home on a Thursday, and I was on a phone call, and like and a blocked caller came up. And I was like, oh, I wonder who this is. And I clicked over, and it was that voice being like, hey, Jamie, it's Bob Redford. And I was like, hi, Bob Redford, on my phone. And I was like, let me get off the other line really quick. And he's like, oh, no worries, listen, I'll call you back. And he hung up. And I was, you know, sort of staring at my phone, being like, no. And so the next 10 minutes were sort of like the longest 10 minutes of my life, waiting for him to call back. And thankfully he did, and said yes.
Wow, and we're glad he did. And Dennis, obviously Colonel Roger Charles is a very real human being who was involved in helping you prepare for the film. How much did you know about him before this project began, and what surprised you the most about his sort of role in everything?
Well, I didn't know him before. He was like consultant, you know, for a military consultant within 60 minutes. And but I knew the story. I remember when the story came out, and I was also one of those kids at 18 who went down and registered for the draft in 1972 in Texas, by the way. And I didn't want to go. Nobody wanted to go by then. The volunteer army was going to start the next year, but Roger Charles is one of those kids who did go because he felt it was his duty, and he came into this. He didn't have any kind of bone to pick, really. It was really just about. There was a lot of people who didn't get to go. Most of the war was fought by like kids from the ghetto and from, you know, poor neighborhoods, and the elite had a choice, you know, college deferment, or it was, you know, your family could buy your way out of it in a sense. And you know, that was all right too, but it was just the whole cover-up thing about it didn't sit well.
And what did you learn researching the role that, I guess, took you by surprise in terms of stories are put together, and maybe, I was actually surprised to know that they had someone like him in-house advising.
Yeah.
Such a strange thing to go from the military life to then suddenly being thrust into this journalistic.
Well, you have to have your fact checkers, you know, to back it up, and have those relationships within the military, which he had. You know, he was in it for so long, and he was also sort of a rogue himself, or a rebel, I would say. You know, but what really got me about reading the script when I first got the script at Jamie's was that how he articulated how corporations have really become sort of a fifth estate of our government, you know, able to influence the media and government and judiciary, I guess, in a sense, but and how we all kind of take that for granted. But this is where it started. This was the end of the news as we knew it, or used to know it, the public trust part of that, where they, you know, Jamie told this story that has so many pieces to it, a hard story to tell, and told it in a very interesting way that really compels audiences, I think, and it really moves along.
And what do you hope people take away from this film? I find it a very depressing story.
Oh, good.
Because it shows how someone can have the best of intentions to tell a story that she feels is important, and yet she sort of gets, raked over the cold sword. But I'm wondering, what do you hope the public takes away from this, and do you want people to be more vigilant in sourcing their own news, since each of us has a responsibility to sort of not rely on one medium or one source to gather information? And what can we do to sort of improve the process that is already obviously maligned by too much corporate domination and all these nefarious entities?
Sure. No, I mean, I listen, first and foremost, I think for me, I wanted to tell a good story well. I mean, and I found, Mary as a person and as a character, and Dan Rather too, so compelling and so interesting in their relationship, so fascinating that I really, first and foremost, just wanted to take you on that journey and what they went through, because I think it's an amazing story, and I think it's an amazing story that happened at a very specific time, when it was the first time the internet really rose up and changed the way what you would now call a mainstream media story was perceived, and they did it with such a speed. I mean, there was stuff before the episode finished airing. There was stuff online about the documents being fake. I mean, it was like it aired from 8 to 9, and like at 8:42 the first post came out. And that's a speed that completely took Mary and Dan and CBS all by surprise. And it's a speed we live with now, as every day. It's very, very normal for us. It's so I want people to enjoy the film and experiences of the film. If there's some conversation that goes along with that about where we are right now in terms of our media and how it's given to us and corporations and all of that stuff that's kind of baked in here, if there's some conversation too that comes of it, that to me is icing on the cake, and that would be wonderful. So yeah.
And you shot most of the film in Australia.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what were the challenges of bringing this incredibly American story to life? Not to say the Australian crew members can't
sure,
facilitate that, but it is, that's a very long way away.
Yeah,
and
no.
Did you have to, I'm just so curious looking at the newsrooms, were those all sets that you were using? And were you using actual newsrooms in Australia, or did you build everything? Or?
No, we did a lot of locations. So we did a lot of the CBS evening news set we built on a stage, but we only were able to be on stage, I think, for about 4 days. Because we had no money. Strangely, because there were not so many car chases in the film, so we had no money, so we couldn't afford stage work actually, and to build stuff. So we built CBS News, evening news, and we got the 2 floors in an abandoned office building to build the 60 Minutes offices in. But it was listen, the shooting in Australia was challenging but also great, and it was Kate Blanchett who said, listen, I really want to do this film. I promised my family I wouldn't work this fall. Is there any way you can shoot this in Australia? And you go, absolutely.
Yeah. That's how I envisioned it all along.
Of course, I was going to call you and suggest the same thing. No problem whatsoever. And then you hang up the phone, and you call your producer, and you go, how the heck are we going to shoot? This is Australia. But they came through, I think, amazingly well, and it was. But we had a great team, to do it, and a great Australian crew, and everybody dedicated themselves. Our costume designer. I was from New Zealand, and I think had only been to the States once, and was like, okay, now I have to create military uniforms, and and Amanda Neal, she threw herself into it. Everybody just.
Were there a lot of Australian actors?
There were a lot of Australian actors in the film. Actually.
The woman,
they're good at doing that, so that's documented.
I know they're annoyingly good at everything actually. But the woman who plays Stacey Keach's wife was so wonderful.
Oh,
was she a local woman?
Yeah.
I was wondering about her.
Yeah.
She knew what county in Texas she was from. That's how good she was.
Wow.
And she was not from there. She
was a real standout. They were really great.
Yeah, her name's Noni Hazelhurst. She's an Australian actor. She's sort of, she and Jackie Weaver and all that whole sort of generation came up together, and she was amazing. And it's funny because she's very, very strong. And I kept sort of saying, you have to kind of be in the background because I want no one to expect you to, it's like when you step forward, I don't want anyone to expect that you're going to step forward.
Right.
So just keep, and she was amazing.
Yeah, she was great.
Yeah, well, she did that scene where when she comes back, and says,
Yes.
how is he? And,
It's an amazing speech, actually.
we were all just sitting, and our jaws were all dropped, just watching.
You look like properly gobsmacked.
Over and over again, do it.
And Dennis, do you have a particular scene in the film that you liked, either to be a part of or to watch come together?
It's really about the whole movie for me. And
We got to reunite with your In Good Company co-star Topher.
with Topher,
That was
yeah,
a fun moment in the parking lot there.
the 2 out of the 3. There will be a rematch. I think in 2019 we're going to do a rematch.
We kept talking about that every 5th day was, we would shoot a drama for 4 days, and every 5th day we would shoot a comedy with Dennis and Topher, basically. It was sort of, there's a whole sort of buddy cop movie going on underneath.
Topher and I did a movie called In Big Company together.
Topher played his boss. It's really good if you haven't seen it. And then finally, how would you describe sort of bringing Dan Rather's story to life? I know he's been very favorable in the movie. He got very emotional in Toronto when you unveiled it there. I would hope that, I would at least expect you would want him to have been happy with it, and it sounds like he was. Have you had interactions with him that have been meaningful?
Yeah, Dan was, amazing because it's one of those things where, I optioned Mary's book, and then the first thing I did was sort of call Dan and see if he would be willing to speak with me about it. And, it's one of those things where you call somebody up and you say, I have good news and bad news. The good news is I want to make a movie about you. The bad news is I want to make a movie about the worst thing that ever happened to you professionally. Like, we're not gonna do all of the amazing things you did in Vietnam or how we're going to dramatize the fall of your career. So he would have been well within his rights to tell me to just keep walking. But he didn't. He was incredibly gracious and invited me into his life and was, just said, what do you need to know? And so I would go to him and I would say, how did this work and what happened here and how did you feel here? And I did it not just with Dan, I did it with a lot of different people who were involved in it, some of whom had very different takes on what happened with Mary and Dan and were less favorable. But I wanted to get sort of everybody's take on it. And Dan was could not have been more forthcoming and open. Also about things that were painful to him and moments that didn't necessarily cast him in the best light. And he always knew that at the end of it, we were going to go away and make the film that we were going to make. He wasn't going to have a say in the content, but he still made himself available to us. And so when he finally saw it, he saw it in New York first, and I knew he was seeing it at like 3 o'clock in New York, and I just like spent from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock sort of staring at my phone, being like, and I was like, I'm not going to hear anything until after 5 o'clock. But then I was like, but what if he walks out? And they call me that he was very angry, and so I sort of held my breath from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and then my phone rang, and he was he's a gentleman. I mean, above all other things, he's a complete gentleman.
Did he and Robert spend much time together during the making of it?
Well, the thing about
They lived together, didn't they?
They did. It was
Shared
the
apartment.
commitment I felt that they showed.
That's a TV show.
Had a jacket,
Right,
Jill,
by the way,
bathroom.
we can sell that show, by the way.
Crazy.
Well, listen, the thing about Robert Redford is he knows everybody. So when he signed on, he goes, I know Dan. And I was like, of course you know Dan. You know everybody. But so they had known each other since the 70s, and they weren't super close friends, but they had knowledge of each other and had been in the same circles. And so that definitely informed kind of Bob's take on it. And I think he did a wonderful, subtle job of doing it, because we talked about the fact that we didn't want it to be an impression. Because I felt doing an impression of Dan Rather is a trap, because that's what then, if you do that, then your performance is judged solely on that.
Right.
I
know.
Yeah, that was the most amazing thing about Redford's performance. Is that
It's
he
so
didn't
nuanced.
try. He just his presence is he was.
Right.
He has the gravity. They both have the gravity. Like you were saying, they just kind of pull that whenever they come into the room.
Yeah, they had the same.
The weight, the public trust thing.
Sure.
So, yeah.
And I think it would have been distracting to have prosthetics and wig and all that.
Yeah.
I was relieved actually that there wasn't more of these sort of mimicry, because I think that can be a little dicey. We have time for some audience questions if anyone has. Gentleman toward the top.
Yeah, I have a question for both Dennis and James. Essentially, how do you choose what projects to work on? Is it the money? Is it the opportunity to travel to Australia? Is it the script? Is it some storyline that, hey, I've got to be part of this story no matter how much I have to sacrifice? What is your factors that, what are the factors that make you decide what projects to work on?
Definitely the money.
Yeah, the first two you can get on a game show, the money and the free trip to Australia. But yeah, it's really about the script that I read to begin with and how it moves me. You know, there's always like the script you read, the movie you make, and then the movie that comes out. But it's the story is right there in the script, and that's what I look for. I look for a compelling story that I'm interested in and that touches me so much.
I will also say, just for the record, that nobody got paid on this movie. Like, there was certainly no, there was not.
Did Kate sort of forego a salary on this film? I mean, just to be
She did, but I mean, nobody made their quote or their fee. It was everybody, which was amazing for me, that everybody wanted to be there. And also then to get on and Dennis, for example, basically had read the script and had to commit to it. Like within 48 hours, he had to basically say, I'm getting on a plane and going 15 hours away for the next 2 months, and so that's a big cliff to jump off of, especially when we're like, oh, and by the way, we're not going to pay you. To sweeten the deal,
I gotta bring my
there will be
family.
no that's good. I mean, but it's
a good experience.
I think it's,
but I just want to be the company of those people, and I want to be part of the story, and really wanted to work with Jamie.
Thank you. Back at you. There was a lot of stuff when after this happened, and we talked about it in the postscript. Dan Rather did file a lawsuit against CBS, and one of the things that happened during the discovery process, because you have to sort of turn over lots of emails, and is it did come to light that there were certain lobbyists who were consulted about who to put on the panel to make it look good. So there was certainly everybody who was wanted this to go away wanted it to go away.
And I think also, I think it's more than just political left or right, because it could have been either. To tell you the truth, I think more so. This was corporate politics in bed with the government, with the established government, the lobbyists, in other words, controlling things. That's where this got hung up. And that's where I think journalism took the hit in the way that we knew it.
Wow, heavy stuff for a Saturday night. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all.
Thanks for coming.